Um, and welcome to a session we're going to have today on the collective struggle of Bangladesh and Palestine, where we're going to be exploring the past, present, and future of our liberation struggles, how they're connected, contextualize it in history, and see how we can continue to mobilize now as Bangladeshis living here in the imperial core. So the People's Forum is a political education space, a cultural center for internationalist working class movement building. Who has been here before to the People's Forum? Let's see a raise of hands. All right, amazing. Who has been here before for Shut It Down for Palestine, for volunteers meeting? Incredible. So TPF has served as a hub for the Shut It Down for Palestine solidarity movement here in New York City, with over 400 people packing the place every single week to lend various skills and volunteer and organize and share, build together in every way possible until we not only see the bare minimum of a ceasefire, but that we see a liberated Palestine and an end to the Zionist apartheid regime. So in this moment in Palestine, we have had over 3 months of bombing Gaza. Over 25,000 Palestinians are dead, over 90% of the population displaced, and Israel continues its genocidal apartheid regime funded by the United States. But we know that they are losing general support and that our daily mobilizations are impactful, and our organizing is extremely impactful. They've just this week bombed Beirut, they've bombed Iraq, they're instigating a regional war, a war that they will lose. And that's why it is absolutely critical that we study and we understand our people's histories of resistance, our various liberation struggles, and those of the empire in order to contextualize this moment. And so I'll introduce myself. My name's Tahia Islam. I'm an organizer and a cultural worker based in Queens. And I was formerly a member here at the People's Forum.
Hi y'all, Assalamualaikum. My name is Fabliha Yaqub. I go by she, they pronouns. I'm a queer Bangladeshi organizer and the founder of a grassroots collective, Marigold Seeds Collective, for LGBTQ plus South Asians and Indo-Caribbeans. I'm just so excited to be here with you guys, especially alongside these two incredible comrades that I deeply look up to. And yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabira, she, her pronouns. I'm a student researcher in modern Middle Eastern politics and organizer currently based pretty far away in Dublin, Ireland, which we love the Irish solidarity with Palestine, but I'm really excited to be in this space with you guys, especially with Tahia and Fabliha today.
Ooh, awesome. And thank you all for coming out here. I know we have folks of Bangladeshi descent, but folks from all over, because this is a liberation struggle that we know ties to us here, ties to Palestine, ties to all of the struggles that we come from. So it's key to note that, we're not professional historians nor experts on the topic, but we're organizers who are embedded in local working class struggles from housing to climate, to immigration, to the arts, and are forever students and learners because we know that our struggles for life here are connected to those of our people in Bangladesh and our people and siblings in Palestine. So I have a question for you. How many of y'all have learned about Bangladesh in school before? Raise your hands. I see no hands. How many of you have learned about Palestine in school? A few, and I bet it was not a very good breakdown. And the reason why we don't see a lot of hands up here right now is that in a capitalist, bourgeois system of education, history is primarily taught to us fragmented. But we can make sense of this moment and the role that we can play both as Bangladeshis and simply as people of conscience by connecting those dots of our resistance, our wins, and to understand what the oppressors have done and the ways in which what those tactics and those practices have been intentionally obfuscated by the ruling class. And so 2024 is a new year. This is a really special way to start off the year. And this is a year for liberation. On January 1st, we celebrated the 1804 Haitian Revolution. We celebrated the 61st anniversary of the Cuban Revolution. And on December 16th, we celebrate the Victory Day of Bangladesh. And so in our lifetime, we will see a liberated Palestine. In this year, we will see a liberated Palestine.
You know, I also want to give a big disclaimer for speaking for all three of us. All three of us here today are Bangladeshi Americans, and we want to say that because although we will be talking about Bangladeshi resistance and the liberation, we will never truly understand the deep impacts that Bangladeshis and our homeland are facing today and results of the genocide. And we completely understand our privilege and position today. And today is not necessarily talking about the political climate in Bangladesh, but more so speaking about Bangladeshi resistance and honoring our ancestors. The point of today is really to connect the struggles and the resistance and the power of collective struggle, because we know deep down that our oppressors are deeply afraid when we're all standing together. They don't want our voices together. They don't want us to mobilize together. And that's exactly what we're here doing today. And our real enemy is our colonizers, is our oppressors. And this is just a reminder of how important it is that we join together in our forces. And with that being said, we also want to do a moment of silence. As you guys know, that Tahia just mentioned, every day our Palestinian siblings are dying, our martyrs are being erased, and also thinking about Martyrs' Day and also Victory Day, the Martyr Intellectual Day. And so we want to have a moment of silence to commemorate those and think about our ancestors and the people in Palestine. So if we can have a moment of silence to ground ourselves, to think about our people, that would be great. Thank you so much. We also want to discuss quickly that we are also, all of us together are on indigenous land as well. What does it mean for us to navigate these contradictions while we talk about Palestinian struggle, while we are also on indigenous land? So I also want for us to think about that as we move forward in our struggle, in our liberation and resistance. Yeah. Do you want to say anything quickly? You're good? Okay, cool. Yeah, so with that being said, we'll get started. How are you guys feeling? Oh, you guys can do better than that. Come on, let's try again. Okay, cool. So I'll be starting us off today. So I'm actually gonna be standing. Yeah. And also, by the way, my voice is a little stuffy. I have this thing called allergies. Unfortunately, life is a joke, and it's January, and I have allergies. So please bear with me. But are we good on volume, if everyone can hear? Perfect. Yay. Can you be in charge of cooking? Okay, cool. I'm going to be holding this. I'll just look at you and nod. Is that okay? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll get it started for today. So together, we will be out exploring and analyzing these questions. What are the connections between Bangladesh and Palestine? What did Bengali and Palestinian resistance and solidarity look like in the past and now? How can we contextualize it during key historical moments? And lastly, living in the belly of the beast, how do we mobilize members of the diaspora towards a liberated Palestine?
So while we think about all those questions, I guess not only to orient ourselves with the topic, but also with the information that we've been able to collect and learn and study over the last 3 months, and just like this entire lifetime of unlearning and decolonizing our minds from oppression and colonialism and imperialism. We want to just also orient you all with each other. So if we can all just look to the person on the right, and if you don't have anyone on the right, just turn the corner and look at the person behind you or in front of you. And kind of just think about and discuss how have you shown up for Palestinians over the last 3 months. And it's okay to say that you haven't shown up. It's a lot. And the future, like we have tomorrow. So if you haven't done as much as you have wanted to do, feel free to talk about what brings you here and what motivated you to come and share in this space. Thank you. So we'll just have like 4 minutes of discussion with your partner right next to you.
Cool.
So just while we wrap our conversations, um,
Hi guys, can you clap once? Clap twice? Okay, my mom's a kindergarten teacher. She always does that to get attention for her children, so I'm doing that for you guys today.
internally we are all children, but if we could get 2 to 3 volunteers to share the amazing insights that they had during their conversations, feel free to just raise your hand, and I'll just run the mic to you. But also, like, no worries to, like, we're all learning, we're all showing up in different ways. It's beautiful to see the different, like, many different ways that we can all show up. So, because we, like, alone here, we're all coming from different forms of organizing in the past. So, yeah. Do we have any hands? Any bold ways of showing up for Palestine? Oh, yeah. So when you share, just say your name, where you're coming from, and then your response.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Salsabila. I go by she, her, or they, them pronouns. And I'm Bangladeshi. I just wanted to share something because just to emphasize the power of like mobilizing and showing like demonstration of mass solidarity. So I currently work in a school, and if you also work in the DOE, you would have seen like this really outrageous and pro-Zionist message by the chancellor of DOE. And it was obviously very heartbreaking to see like a leader in education take such a stance and use like strong words. So my colleague and it might sound like I'm rambling, but I promise I have a message. Well, my colleague and I, we basically like pushed back. We were met with repercussions. So as a silent protest, we decided to wear our keffiyehs. And this was back in October. So a lot of the demonstrations were not as visible yet. So it felt scary, like even walking outside wearing the keffiyeh, getting looks, especially when you're like visibly Muslim with a hijab. But going to like these demonstrations, right, and seeing like mass solidarity and seeing like so many people around you, really like took that fear away from me and us. And we also saw other people in the building in our school showing up in keffiyehs and yeah, so like the power, and I can't explain the fear. If you're like a hijabi or like a visibly marginalized person, you probably know what I'm talking about, like constantly watching your back. So yeah, so the fact that like it went from me like fearing for my life every second when I'm outside, and feeling super alienated at work, to feeling so empowered and feeling like it's not hopeless, I think is like very powerful in terms of like mobilizing and mass solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like we can all agree that like it takes one seed to allow us to start learning and prioritizing education in our journey of like standing in solidarity with all oppressed people of the world. Do we have one other volunteer? I'm just going to stand in the middle so I can see. Oh, thank you so much. Again, name, where you're coming from, and your response.
My name is Tarek. I'm Palestinian and Lebanese, and we talked a bit about when it comes to the energy that's currently around the issue of Palestine, how to capture that energy and mobilize that in the long term as well, instead of just right now when the iron is still hot, I guess. And we mentioned building routines to keep people coming back. What else? Yeah, that's right. Also, how there was a lot of machinery in terms of the media and rhetoric that just kind of turned on, and those systems of rhetoric from the 9/11 days and even McCarthyism, that all kind of switched right back on and began targeting us, and I guess we're aware of that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. So anyone else? Any other takers? Oh, we have very passionate.
Hi, my name is Evelyn, and I am a Palestinian Jordanian, and I'm from Michigan. I came to visit my aunt here, and she just told me she works for an organization called the DSA, and it's supposed to help stop your tax dollars from going towards certain what are they called? What'd you say?
It's a piece of legislation that the DSA is working towards that stops funding organizations that support settlements in Palestine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate all the diversity and the responses from small seeds to lifelong commitments to actual legislation. So thank you so much for everyone sharing. Now I'll pass it to Fabliha to kind of start talking about our number one op, which is British colonialism.
Yay. This is on still? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so we're just gonna go into it. So we're basically gonna be setting this up as a timeline and to give more understanding of really the formations of what's happening, because we also understand that everyone really has different journeys and points of understanding what happened in Palestine and in Bangladesh. So we're really gonna start all the way from the beginning, which is British colonialism. This is where it's all started and the foundation. It always goes back to British colonialism, am I right? So we're going to 1858 when the Britain officially claimed rule over India, renaming it British India, and then also 1917 the Britain conquered Palestine, administering under the League of Nations mandate. So to give a little deeper understanding, before British colonization of India, I also briefly want to give some disclaimers for people that don't really know or understand. I'll be using language like British India or India because obviously at this time, Pakistan and Bangladesh is not formed. So when I say India, you can imagine this huge, massive land combining Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and all sorts. So when the British came, my apologies, before the British came, really what the understanding of India is that everything was a communal based. There wasn't really necessarily tensions between religions. Of course, there was always internal conflict, but it was always based on communal living. That is until the British came. So in 1858, when the British came to maintain control, what they did was divide India into different provinces and major provinces and minor provinces. And Bengal was actually the largest and most populous province. So there's this huge conception now with the Bengal, especially with this discrimination against Bangladeshis and Bangladesh, is that we had nothing to offer, that we're very lowly, that we don't really have much in our resources and whatnot. And that's because we were exploited. So during this time, for the British, the Bengal was actually the most desirable. It was rich due to its resources of spices, beautiful silks, oils, tea gardens, rice plantations, and more. And under this time with British rule, the Bengal region had its biggest foreign exports. So as you can see here with the images, that in the late 19th century, the Bengal had tea plantations, which was exploitation of labor and indentured servants, slavery, and whatnot. So there's also another misconception, speaking of South Asia, that there's always been one partition, which was 1947. But actually, there was another partition, which people are not aware about, is the 1905 partition of Bengal. And why I want to highlight this is because, of course, under British colonization and partition, there was so much monstrosity that went on, but Bengal really took the biggest hit and was under extreme torment. And in 1905 was when the partition of Bengal happened. So this kind of solidified everything that went into the partition. So what happened was, because the Bengal was such a mass piece of land, the British divided it, or created the partition, which is another word for division, to maintain more control. So what they did was they split these up into two, with the West Bengal being a Hindu majority and the East Bengal and Assam being the Muslim majority. So you can imagine with Hindus living here and Muslims living here, they suddenly had to feel like a clan mentality that was enforced and thrusted by the British. So you can imagine the chaos that ensued with people having to go back and forth and the extreme chaos that happened. So this kind of solidified the tensions that went into the partition. Sorry. Oh, also, sorry, can you go back? I also want to say briefly that even though there was a partition of Bengal in 1905, due to resistance in 1911, it was regrouped and reunited. But even though things went back to normal, aka not really, you can imagine the extreme tensions that happened between Hindus and Muslims that again was instigated by the British. Also, I'm going to stand here because I feel like I'm blocking folks. So let's go to 1917, when the British took control over Palestine. So the British established rule in Palestine, took it away from the Ottoman Empire, and mostly was committed to Zionism because they wanted to protect imperial powers. And what I mean by that is, to give further context, in 1917 was when the Bolsheviks came into power out of the Russian Revolution. So because of this, and to protect imperial powers in the Middle East, they were committed to protecting Zionism. And this was when the British declared the Balfour Declaration. How many of you guys are familiar with the Balfour Declaration? Okay, good amount of hands. But for those that don't know, it was mostly basically an announcement of the British saying that they were devoted to making a Jewish homeland, or again, Zionist agenda. And because after the 1917, when the British took control over Palestine, this led to 1920s and 1930s, when the British mandated and facilitated colonial occupation from Europeans to settle to Palestine. And I also want to highlight quickly that when I was doing my personal research and when I was typing this up, I myself was accidentally using language like Jewish immigration, because that's what kept coming up in the research. But I realized that's because of the propaganda that Zionists really has thrusted upon us. So I want you guys to make sure and to really correct yourself when you're using the language that this is land settlements and occupation. This is not Jewish immigration. The reason why they want to say that and repeat that to us constantly is because when Palestinians really calls that out, they could use that excuse that we're anti-immigration, when really we could see the bullshit of it all, that it's really colonial land settlements and occupation. So I just wanted to give that little disclaimer of how important language is. So moving forward, talking about resistance, because we're not going to take the fucking British's bullshit. So yeah, moving forward to resistance. So in the 1930s and 1940s was when really huge movements of resistance came up. So I'm not sure if how many of you guys are familiar with South Asian activism or anti-imperialist efforts, but unfortunately, a lot of the conversation is dominated by Hindu nationalism, more so focusing on Gandhi, which I'm sure everyone in this room knows who Gandhi is. But what's really unfortunate is to see how us Bengalis have been left out of the conversation. Because the reality is that us Bengalis, especially as Bengali Muslims, we were the frontier of anti-imperialist efforts. And of course, we're not really in that discussion. And I wanted to give a few examples talking about the most important uprisings that we're not really taught upon. So just for my Chittagangians, if you guys are in the room, one of the uprisings that happened was the Chittagong British Armory raid. Another one was the Banga movement, or the Pepsi movement, that happened amongst indigenous folks. And so these are a couple examples out of many incredible uprisings fighting against the British, seizing army, mobilizing together. And I want to touch upon this because it really goes to fact to show that resistance is in our blood. Mobilization is in our blood. All of us come from a line of strong fighters. And out of this time, what comes from a huge spark in nationalism, which is called the Swadeshi movement. This actually started right after the partition of Bengal that we talked about in 1905. Yes, 1905, which is the movement sparking Bengali identity. And you guys could probably learn a lot about it on your own, but you guys are probably familiar with songs like Amar Shona Bangla, which was highlighted in the Bengali Liberation War, or you can see when you go to your local Mela, that's your parents are probably playing it. It was actually originated back to this movement here. So you can see the interconnections between the inspiration, even 50 years later, into the Liberation War. So, one last thing. So it's really beautiful to see how our culture and resistance, as time again shows within our people. And I also wanted to highlight something else really quickly, the fact that women has always been left out of the conversation. Women have always been such a strong instrument in resistance and rebellions and revolutionaries. So I wanted to highlight these incredible women super quickly and for you guys to know their names and remember their names. These badass girls right here who were only 16 years old. Can you imagine? From Comilla. Anyone from Comilla in the house? Okay, yeah, exactly, yep. This is for you. These badass girls right here, when they were 16 years old in 1931, they distracted British army men with chocolate. And while they were eating chocolate, they took out their guns out of their shari and they shot him. Yep, yep. Yeah. Exactly, 16. So remember their names, Shanti Ghosh and Suniti Chowdhury. Another incredible woman right here. In 1949, Ila Sen led the peasants' uprising in Nachule in present-day Rajshahi, and also led the Bengali Communist Party. You probably won't hear her name as much, but unfortunately, of course, because they always leave out women. But she was such a trailblazer and anti-British imperialism, and also really fighting for the rights of indigenous Bengalis. So, yeah. So going back to resistance, but now in Palestine, in 1930s and 1940s, huge anti-British resistance movements erupted. For example, the Great Palestinian Revolt. Again, as I mentioned before, Palestinian women were also extremely instrumental. And as we saw before, the connection is how culture was used as a means of resistance. For example, Palestinian women who were serving as messengers inspired famous folklore songs called, apologies for the mispronunciation, if someone could correct me later, Talin el Jaba, which means climbing up the mountain, because they would go to spread messages to prisoners, and they will literally hike up mountains, which inspired, again, songs. As you can see, probably you guys have seen TikToks and videos of Palestinians using traditional dance of dabke, the protest to perform at political rallies. So we can see time and time again how culture has been used as a tool of resistance. And it's so powerful because I think about now how Israel has been destroying monuments in Palestine, like in Nazareth and all across Gaza, all across Palestine, to diminish the Palestinian identity, and even occupying and liquidizing Palestinian cuisine as a means to erase and eradicate culture. But culture is such a powerful tool of resistance. And so I really hope that you guys could use your own culture and really represent, because this is what it means to resist. I'm also thinking about how in the 1930s and 1940s, under the Great Palestinian Revolt, how Palestinians went on strike, calling for the end of colonial land settlements and non-payment of taxes to British administration. So photos of people rallying, or also even seizing British military vehicle, which is so fucking badass. So you can see so much badassery. Again, women have they been instruments in resistance. As I mentioned before, they were such an instrument, and I will say this time and time again, how gossip is actually praxis. And you can see right here in this image how Palestinian women, they would share information by serving as messengers and spies to those imprisoned. And they would also warn each other of British raids, Zionist raids, and whatnot. So, yeah. And also, so sorry. And also another thing which I thought was super cool was how Palestinian women was also in charge of storming into British prisons to free prisoners. So now we're moving forward, and we're going to be talking about World War II and when it began in 1939. So World War II is actually such a huge turning point of British control over South Asia and Palestine. Sorry, I meant to say India and Palestine. And this is when things really started escalating. So before we got into the events, I want to talk about this really quickly, of how the British used divide and conquer as a tactic to keep control over Palestine and India. Sorry, one second. So yeah, divide and conquer as a tactic to use over Palestine and India. So for Palestine, what the British used to do is that they would manipulate Palestinians and also instigate with with Jewish Zionist settlers. And what I mean by that is that the British would basically pretend to be on both sides, usually for their own selfish efforts, similar to what they did in British India, when the British would secretly side with Muslim and Hindu communities and purposely instigating each other. The reason why I say this, which we'll get into later, is because this is actually not a unique tactic. Although we're using this in the context of Palestine and British India, we actually see this time again, like even now. So this is not unique to this, and I could see how it happens to our own communities as well, and even with the ruling class and our oppressors. So this is literally a colonized playbook, and you can see how they did it time again in Palestine and British India. And in this picture right here is an image of Churchill in Jerusalem. And over here is a picture of Lord Wavell in the Bengal. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because of this tactic and strategy. The reason why they would do this, it was again for selfish reasons. The British was able to obtain control over all sides and get further support in World War II, from military to foreign political interests, exports, and goods. And during this time, I feel like people don't really like to talk about this because it's uncomfortable and the nuances. But unfortunately, during this time, what the British was able to do was lure people to join the military. So there's actually, Palestinians that volunteer to join to support the British, or even on Punjabis. There's a long history of Punjabis that joined the military during this time in Bengalis. However, with that being said, it's way easier to label them as traitors when really you can imagine the psychological trauma that is involved when it comes to wanting to be on the good side of our colonizers. When you're in a space like that, you are just so desperate and you just want the best for your people, even if it means siding with the oppressors. So again, it's not necessarily about traitorship or whatnot. It's really about the psychological control and the empty promises the British colonizers had over its oppressors. The people that they're oppressing. So during this time in 1939 to the 1940s, as World War II outbreak, what the British attempted to do was give empty, useless solutions. What I mean by that is that they would basically tricked people into making feel like they were being listened to. So they would create these solutions mostly because they wanted support for the war and to get stability because they felt it was a threat to World War II. For an example, in Palestine, what they did in 1939 was a white paper, which I really encourage you to research on your own. And then also in 1942, the Cripps Mission Plan, which both of these ended in deadlock and created more further destruction and resistance. So now World War II has ended, but the impact is not yet over, and it continues to impact British control over India and Palestine. So yes, in February 1947, after World War II, Britain becomes weak. So because of this, because they lack the funds and political means to maintain control, and also with increasing violence for independence in countries like Palestine and India, they decided to withdraw. So this was truly a selfish reason. It was not because they really cared about people's independence. It was truly just because they were like, well, we got to figure out our own economy. Bye. So again, it was all due to selfishness, and it goes to show the extreme carelessness and being like just suddenly withdrawing. So in the same month, in February 1947, it was when the British announced intentions to leave both in India and Palestine. So you can see the overlapping in the timeline. So now we're moving forward to 1948, and 1947, shortly after World War II ends, and the creation of Israel and Pakistan, and also going into the Partition and Nakba. So we're going into 1947, the Partition. How many of you guys are familiar with the Partition? Yeah. How many of you guys learned it on your own? Or how many of you guys learned it in school? Okay, got you. So I feel like sometimes in our schools and what's taught to us is extremely sanitized, mostly again because the what's given to us is kind of strategized by the colonizers and our oppressors. But the reality of 1947, when partition was called, when the British decided to withdraw its control from British India and to divide it into India and Pakistan, it was extremely bloody. You could imagine the pain that was ensued, the division, the violence, the riots, when people were just scattered for their lives. And I think a lot about how, again, the British really thrusted upon this clan mentality, but again, it was out of survivorship. So during this time, people had to leave their home, their ancestral land, to suddenly go to another land that they never set foot on. You can imagine the extreme pain, and it was just horrible. And this also shows the recklessness of the British and the carelessness of it all as well. And due to the partition, what came out of it was the birth of Pakistan. And now a year later, which is crazy, a year later what happened was the Nakba. The Nakba, it happened in May 1948 when Zionist military forces expelled thousands of Palestinians, destroyed villages, and remaining parts were divided, such as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So you can imagine the extreme, again, kind of what I said before, the extreme pain, the extreme confusion, and can you even imagine being a little kid, or even just anyone at any age, have to be walking on foot, not really knowing where you're going, suddenly being displaced from the home that you knew all your life? It's just extremely painful. And even though this happened in 1948, we're seeing it again with the second Nakba that has happened recently. And it's just so painful to see it happening all over again. And of course, the Nakba happened because of the creation of Israel. I also want to say super quickly that although I provided a timeline of 1947 partition, I do want to reiterate that we are not conflating or comparing these two at all. These two contexts are extremely different, and we also have to acknowledge that as well, given the histories. However, we really want you guys to understand the timeline of it all and how the overlaps of it and the carelessness of the British, and to remind you that our real enemy is the British. So again, it's not comparing the Nakba and the partition, but more so seeing the connection and struggle and resistance. So 1950s, when the post-creation of Israel and Pakistan and violence, that was ensued. So right after the creation of Pakistan and Israel was when even more violence was thrusted. More so because after the creation of these countries was when an identity wanted to be created. So for example, in Israel, Zionists, they continued to have the massacres and really just thrusted upon the Zionist agenda, Zionist quote-unquote culture and whatnot. And in Pakistan continued the massacres of Bengalis, especially indigenous tribes and Bengali Hindus, because they wanted to create the Pakistani national identity. In this picture right here, you could see a Pakistani soldier checking if this young man is circumcised or not to see if he was Hindu or Muslim. So you can imagine the extreme violence on all sides, the sexual violence, the physical violence, the emotional torment of it all. So again, while we're not comparing these two, we're putting together the extreme pain and of our struggle. Oh, sorry, can you go back? I also want to reiterate too the geographical context of it too, how shortly after the creation of Israel, Israel moved its capital from Tel Aviv to western part of Jerusalem, and during that time, Pakistan also named East Bengal and renamed it East Pakistan. So it goes to show the context of language and geography and what it means for oppressors to colonize land and oppress further. Yeah, that's basically my part. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to move on to... So yeah, I just provided the foundation for you guys, and now we're going to move on to Tahia, who's going to lead through deliberation. So that was mostly a recap and understanding.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you, Fablia. And how are we doing? We just moved through a lot of history very quickly, but an incredibly important foundational understanding of when we get up to the liberation wars and our resistance. We're doing okay? Yes, awesome. All right, so the key of having this event today is that we can also, I mean, it's incredible to see the timeline. We have 47, partition, we have 48, Nakba. We're gonna go a little bit more into the politics of World War II. And so now I'm gonna speak a little bit of 48 up until the Liberation War for Bangladesh in 1971 into the 80s and 90s and the long, long history of support that Bangladesh has had for an independent Palestine. So, we can go on to the next one. Actually, I can do it. Yeah, perfect. So who has like a vague idea of the Bangladeshi liberation movement? Yeah, it took me some time to grasp it as well. And it's something that it starts way before 71, which is when the liberation war and the armed conflict actually was. It's something that started as early as in 1948. And the catalyst was really around language and culture. So the Bangla language movement. At this time, Bangladesh was East Pakistan, and West Pakistan refused to allow Bengali to become a state-recognized language. They wanted Urdu to be the dominant language, to represent a strong Muslim state, and in order to maintain like a hegemonic control. So in 1948, students held a general strike in which students of language universities and other colleges in the city protested against the exclusion of Bangla language from official use. And also, I don't know if y'all have ever experienced any Bengali poetry, any Bengali music, but it's extremely special. It's a language of resistance. It's one of the most beautiful languages in the world. I say that with a lot of bias and also not bias. It's something that rolls off the tongue, and it has traditionally been, you know, there was a Bengali Renaissance, there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of poetry through Bengali. And so a big catalyst was in February 21st, 1952. In Bangla, we call this Ekoshi February. The students of the University of Dhaka and other political activists defied the law and organized a protest that turned extremely violent from the police, obviously. And this was a spark towards the Bengali national liberation struggle. Many of these students who were at Dhaka University took up arms to fight with the Mukti Bahini, who were the freedom fighters during the war to come in 1971. And so throughout the 50s and 60s, there was so much resistance within Bangladesh. There was also so much resistance within Palestine, occupied Palestine, in order to have a liberated land. And we know that even right now, as we're organizing to liberate Gaza, that campuses are a hotbed for organizing, for protests, for artistic resistance. And that was true in 1952, that was true in 1971, and they're always targets for police brutality, for military violence. And so it was really crucial to note that the language movement and the liberation struggle really started on a college campus. However, it's also key to note that alongside a cultural movement, this was also an economic struggle. There was a deep, deep food shortage in East Bengal due to the discriminatory policies from West Pakistan that led to famine in the rural regions of Sylhet, which is where I'm from Mymensingh, and from other regions in the rural areas of Bangladesh throughout 1948 and in 1951. And so actually peasants and workers revolted, and they themselves created that strong political demand for a liberation struggle. And a lot of the resistance and the guerrilla fighting training started and happened in the countryside. And so moving forward a little bit, in 1970, there was the Bola cyclone, which killed up to 500,000 people in East Bengal, leaving tons of devastation. And that was another spark in order to fight for our liberation in 71. And just to acknowledge the photos that we have up here on screen, on the left, we have the students sitting in, protesting at Dhaka University in 1952. And then on the right, we have Shahid Minar, which you can find in Dhaka. It's there to commemorate the martyrs and the students of 1952, of Ekoshi February, and now we actually have a UN commemorated day, but something that is celebrated in Bangladesh year after year, called the International Mother Language Day, to celebrate multilingualism, to celebrate the keeping of our language. So 1971. The Liberation War begins. And we could talk forever about the Liberation War, but I'm moving through really quickly. the spark that marked the beginning of the war was in March 25th, 1971, Operation Searchlight. It was a military campaign that was conducted by West Pakistani Army to eliminate growing Bengali resistance in Dhaka, one that was a socialist-led movement. So a lot of organizers who had socialist demands, who were leading so many of these like organized protests and clandestine meetings were massacred. They massacred lecturers, so professors. They massacred students. They ransacked national newspapers. They burned journalists to death. And 60,000 people are said to be killed in 24 hours on March 25th, 1971. And then this was the beginning of an armed conflict until December 16th, 1971, which we mark as Victory Day. And we'll go a little bit more later into some of the additional like geopolitical context of this specific stretch of time. So something we really have been noticing, and I think when we're thinking a lot about our Bangladeshi resistance and the histories that we come from, is that there's a lot of parallels between Bengali and Palestinian occupation and genocide. And we're not conflating the two, but we know that these are things that the oppressors use in order to justify genocide. So for one, we have language and identity. Hundreds of thousands of Bengali civilians were systematically killed, raped, persecuted during the Liberation War and throughout Pakistan's occupation. But, as we are even seeing right now, this genocide was widely unrecognized as it took place. The Pakistani military controlled the media and the international narrative on the war, and major Western powers were largely supportive of that. And so it was only in December of 1971 that the UN called for a ceasefire. Where else can we make that connection? The UN and other international bodies refused to recognize Bangladesh's estimates of the genocide's death toll, which were in the millions. And furthermore, we know the way that identity was demonized during the Liberation War. In Bangladesh, the massacre was justified by incorrectly diluting the identity of Bengalis to being a primarily Hindu population. And in occupied Palestine, Israeli settlers demonize the Arab identity. The Zionists demonize the Arab identity, wiping out Palestinian Christians and across the board. And so we know the ways in which identity is demonized. Another parallel that we can draw is the control of the economy. So in Palestine, we know the way that Israel denies citizenship to Palestinians on their own lands. And in Gaza, which remains under Israeli siege and occupation, we know it's the world's largest concentration camp. Israel imposed a suffocating land, air, and sea blockade, a blockade that affects agriculture, where farmers are blocked from land. Israeli settlers spray pesticides, destroying crops. The blockade affects the air. Israel destroyed Gaza's only airport in the early 2000s and retains full control over Gaza's airspace and regularly flies military planes and drones over it. The blockade affects the sea. They're preventing any boats from entering or leaving Gaza, arresting fishermen that are going too far, around trade, around medicine, like we can go on and on and on. Similarly, in Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan at the time, West Pakistan had complete control over East Pakistan's economy, exploiting East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh's, raw materials like jute, exploiting cheap labor, workers, and having discriminatory policies on trade and the foreign aid flow leading to inaccess of food, leading to famine, again, which we are seeing today every single day in Gaza. Another major point of a parallel that we can see is around the martyring of intellectuals. So we discussed the targeted attacks by the West Pakistani Army on university students and lecturers in Dhaka. It extended to intellectuals of all sorts. It extended to newspaper writers, to artists, to lawyers, And we see the same in Palestine now. We see a calculated assassination of intellectuals from Ghassan Kanafani in 1952, who was assassinated for merely having political words that spoke to the masses and that maintained power and a culture of resistance. He was a prolific militant communist writer, a poet, and a member of the PFLP. And now in Gaza, we see the targeted killings of journalists and artists like Rifat al-Arir, who for years has been writing about life in Gaza, developing the next generation of writers, and illuminating the injustices of the Zionist regime. And we know the role that cultural workers play to both reveal the oppression faced by a people, but also to maintain a liberatory and revolutionary spirit through words and through culture. And for that, they are systematically targeted. And the fourth parallel that we can make right now is around freedom fighters and the very inaccurate mischaracterization to call them terrorists. And I'm just going to go into a quote by a Bangladeshi journalist. Just as Pakistan called Bengali nationalists terrorists, so Israel calls Palestinian freedom fighters terrorists. We therefore rightly find the Palestinian struggle more analogous to our historical experiences, except that ours has achieved success. And within our lifetime, inshallah, Palestine will be liberated. And something to be proud of and something that we're going to go into now is the very long history of support between Bangladesh and between Palestine. Bangladesh has, post-1971, as a liberated independent nation, has always called for an end to Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories and for the creation of an independent Palestinian state. So while Israel was one of the first countries, quote unquote, to offer recognition of Bangladesh as an independent state, the newly formed government of Bangladesh rejected this recognition, stating, quote, "We will not recognize Israel until there is an independent Palestine." Nice, yeah. So Bangladesh was one of the 137 countries to recognize Palestine as a state since the Palestinian Declaration of Independence on November 15th, 1988. And in 1973, while many Arab states were hesitant to recognize Bangladesh's new independence, Bangladesh supported Palestinians' fight against Israel during the October War, which was a war fought in 1973 for a couple of days during Ramadan, during Yom Kippur. And Bangladesh sent 1,000 to 1,500 medical team members and relief supplies for Palestine. But there isn't a lot of documentation on this, and we know why. These records, these archives are intentionally destroyed. They really, oppressors do not want to see the ways in which oppressed nations and people are supporting each other in material, physical ways. We see that here, we see that in ways in which Cuba sends medical teams all over the world, etc. And another fun fact is that Bangladesh allowed the opening of a PLO office in the capital of Dhaka. So PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And PLO officials were frequent guests at events hosted by the Bangladeshi political and diplomatic folks. And again, not a lot of documentation, but the office does exist, and to some degrees it's symbolic, but it is still there. And so this is, how many of you have seen this stamp? It's been making the rounds recently. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. This is a 1980 postal stamp of a Palestinian freedom fighter with the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the background, shrouded by barbed wire, and words that saluted Palestinian freedom fighters as valiant in English and in Arabic. And in 1988, according to the US Library of Congress report, the Bangladeshi government reported that 8,000 Bangladeshi youths volunteered to fight for the PLO, going over to Beirut, to Lebanon, and fighting on behalf of the Palestinian resistance. How many of y'all have heard about that? Yeah, when I heard this, I was in shock, I was in excitement, and I can really feel the ancestral connections of resistance that maintain. There's also a development of military ties between the PLO and Bangladesh, with the PLO attending one-year courses at the Bangladesh Military Academy in Chittagong. And we are talking about places with not a lot of resources. We're talking about places that have been historically oppressed, supporting each other time and time throughout history. And that is something for us to remember as we are seeing how we're going to mobilize here in the belly of the beast. A historic task, the task of our lifetime. Awesome, and I'm gonna give it to Fabia for a second.
Thank you so much, Tahia. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tahia, for saying all this incredible information and the importance of why we really wanted to discuss the timeline and give a quick recap and also give more historical understanding is because of the timeline of it all. I feel like our oppressors really want us to make believe that all of our histories are fragmented and so many years apart, and that, you know, and all because that they really just want us to not make the connections. However, as you can see in this timeline, literally things has happened months apart or even a year apart. So I want you guys to understand the parallels in our timelines and our histories, and to also understand that these are not fragmented. Everything is all interconnected with each other, and so is our struggle and so is our resistance. So just wanted to give that little reminder.
Absolutely. And for that reason, you know, as students of history, we're gonna back up a little bit to contextualize the global geopolitics during these ongoing liberation struggles. Because we know that the tentacles of US imperialism is everywhere. And they are committed to quelling the resistance efforts of national self-determination, both in Bangladesh and in Palestine, by funding Pakistan during this time period and funding Israel historically and now. These are allies that are there to maintain regional power and to stop Soviet influence. And we know that the modus operandi of US imperialism and US Cold War politics is to combat, and because they're fearful of the sovereignty of independent nations. So they fund genocide, they supply arms, they maintain control in the Middle East and the subcontinent for economic exploitative purposes, one that is anti-Soviet and one that is anti-communist. And the Soviet Union had diplomatic, friendly relationships with India, supporting them through various conflicts through the 50s and the 60s. And India supported Bangladesh's strive for sovereignty. And in 1971, the Soviet Union had been a strong supporter of the Mukti Bahini, the freedom fighters of the Bangladeshi Liberation War. And they provided extensive aid, providing arms, and providing support for Bangladeshi liberation. And so Sabira will color in some history now and expand a little bit.
Yeah, so now to another bad guy, the US. Yeah, we have a lot of those, unfortunately. So as the, wait, sorry. Do you mind? So as the Cold War began shortly after the, obviously World War II ended, the U.S. was actually one of the first nations that recognized the establishment of the state of Pakistan. And when I mean the state, again, including West and East Pakistan, East being the land that we know today as Bangladesh. In this time, the establishment of Pakistan, the pro-American Muslim League dominated much of the political landscape initially in West Pakistan, meaning the land we know today as the state of Pakistan, particularly in a region that was actually very important in upholding the kind of ethnic justification towards the occupation of Bengalis and Bangladeshis in the region of Punjab. But as India had friendly diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union, again, considering the really apparent Red Scare, the Pakistani government began its relationship with the American government through initial state visits between Prime Minister Ali Khan and President Harry Truman. But as the years had progressed between 1950 and 1953, obviously, as the Cold War had escalated, defense ties actually increased between the U.S. and Pakistan immediately following after Army Commander and Dictator Ayub Khan's visit to the U.S. And considering the early political landscape as kind of outlined before, Pakistan continued to really reassure the U.S., basically its lover at this point, that it would be loyal and stay loyal with the Western Bloc, and as a result had a very symbiotic relationship with the United States. It being committed to anti-communist values and Western ideals, and in return receiving and getting a lot of military aid and bolstering the actual economy of Pakistan as well. And when I mean Pakistan, I also, again, mean Western Pakistan, the current state of Pakistan. And specifically, the U.S. provided 1.5 million to 2 billion in military aid, weapons to kind of invest in, again, upholding the actual occupation of Bengali people. And what that culminated to was the involvement of Pakistan in joining the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization in 1954. Again, kind of throughout this time. So kind of going again into the economic imperialism of the occupation of Bangladesh and Pakistan, I had a really fun time combing through the CIA archives. And right here is something that they love to rat themselves out on, is that the American government actually bolstered the economic development in West Pakistan, growing the actual GDP to basically 10%, pushing the narrative of successful implementation of capitalism into, again, developing country, kind of showing that as long as you stay true to capitalist values, your country will flourish. Meanwhile, there were a lot of concerns that Bengalis in the East Pakistan territory, that they didn't see any of this economic development. They weren't seeing the flourishing of their land, of their societies, of their civilizations. And as a result, they actually opposed the 1954 involvement in CEDAW. Going to the next slide. Again, kind of talking about the different ways that imperialism has been controlling the narrative within occupation of both Bengalis and Palestinians. This became a geopolitical conflict, where other countries obviously were manipulated into standing in allegiance with the occupation of Bengali people. Again, Nixon and Kissinger are not favorite people, had a deep hatred against India for being pro-Soviet, again, favoring Pakistan due to India's allegiance to the Soviet Union. And when I mean allegiance, they had just friendly ties due to the Soviet Union's commitment to rejection of the occupation of Bengali people. But in 1971, when India got involved in Bangladesh's fight for independence, President Nixon actually sent secret arms shipments to Pakistani forces to prevent India from attacking West Pakistan, Kissinger's exact words. And in the document that you can see on the, I believe it's your left side, or right side actually, there were there was also, again, a lot of fear-mongering and use of Pakistan as basically a puppet to keep India at bay and make sure that they control the South Asian region. And in the non-highlighted paragraph, it kind of shows how Arab countries actually were pulled in to upholding this genocide and this occupation, even though now we can kind of go to the next slide and see that this is all happening while the the state of Israel was being established and the Nakba was happening. So Zionist and U.S. relations predate to 1942 with the Biltmore Conference, which was fundamental in the departure from traditional Zionist policy to the political demand that Palestine will be established as a Jewish commonwealth and expelling the indigenous Palestinian Arabs from their homes and their land. And so in order to kind of maintain the image of American credibility and outmaneuver the Soviet Union, the U.S. actually, within minutes of the recognition of the Israeli state, they had extended de facto recognition of Israel on soon after, again, the state was, they considered themselves free and independent. In President Truman's statement, he said in beating the Soviet satellites, he worries that the Soviets might even announce their intention to recognize the Jewish state in advance. He basically believed that if he wasn't the first person to recognize the country, that this would be a diplomatic defeat. But it's also very interesting that during this time, initially before there was actually strong allegiance to the Israeli state, the U.S. government actually really played between the feelings, not the feelings, but, they played between the Arab nations and the Israeli state, kind of wondering and really exploiting the oil in the region, which we definitely know very well today, because that's often the justification that we see. Yeah, if we want to move to the next slide. And kind of in this document, this is actually really interesting because they're ratting themselves out a whole lot, if you can read. I know it's a little difficult. But this was actually the draft of the position of the United States in respect to Palestine. And in this document, I'm not sure if you can read, but it starts off kind of talking about the threat of Palestinian resistance and also the establishment of the Israeli state, and kind of just talking about their own considerations, their intentions. The U.S. has definitely not settled far from outlining their own interests in any part of the world. But I'm sure you can count how many times oil is written in the following bullet points. But also, they really outline that that it's a reliance on protecting American interests, protecting American economy, and holding that monopoly on oil in the region. Moreover, even in the last point, I actually apologize. I realize I did cover it. Is that they slyly enough said that they wanted to also maintain friendly relations with the Arab countries. And that is kind of why they were treading very lightly on, in the initial stages, financially supporting Israel, if that makes sense. They did recognize the Israeli state. However, finances and the arms deals actually came much later than their first recognition, which is something that I personally found very, very interesting, because we hear about how the U.S. Manipulates the entire world for their own interests. But in this situation, the U.S. kind of basically made a plus and delta chart to be like, do we keep the oil and try to maintain friendly relations with Arab nations who are, again, bolstering our economy, or do we side with this country that might not have Soviet influence, that might stand in our relations, and that we can actually have a stronghold in the region? But looking forward today, we kind of know what they ended up with. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of this actually started during the presidency of Harry Truman, but actually goes to the initial stages of the political system in Israel, where the first Prime Minister, Ben-Gurion, chose to not pursue a strong attachment to the Soviet Union so early in the Cold War. And he didn't form coalitions with the pro-Soviet party within the Israeli Knesset. And by choosing not to align with pro-Soviet Mapan, which is the political group, Ben-Gurion received a promise of $100 million loan guarantee from the United States. That's a lot of money, especially within this time. And given inflation, we can probably assume that's way more money now. And this solidified Ben-Gurion's commitment to anti-communism. And foreshadowing now kind of shows that within both nations, they did end up choosing to come into a really weird affair. But this, as a result, the Soviet Union definitely looked towards this relationship and immediately denounced Zionism and prohibited the immigration of Jewish settlers to Palestine as a result of the growing alliance away from socialism in the formation of the Jewish state to what they perceived as democratic. If you want to. And so, actually, following Truman, the Eisenhower administration actually set the precedent of offering military and economic assistance to thwart Soviet influence in the Middle East. But this was actually not towards Israel. At the time, with the growing nationalism in Egypt, they increased their efforts to make sure that with growing liberation movements and within the region of getting away from the imperialist powers, the Soviet influence wouldn't take in the formation of these nations. So the Eisenhower Doctrine of January 1957 offered $120 million in economic and military assistance to all states that pledged to help to thwart Soviet influence and threats. But this was not, again, towards towards Israel, but then in the later presidency of Kennedy, he was the first to actually coordinate a major arms deal with Israel in 1962, because he actually didn't see Arab nations as a major Cold War ally. This signified the beginning of military cooperation and collaboration between Israel and the United States, a relationship that we know very well to exist today. The first, and then kind of like going to the modern day, America now helps 3.8 billion in military aid annually to this current day, and has been funding the genocide and advancing the sophistication of Israeli armed forces. But this doesn't include the 2 times that Biden has overridden Congress for over 147 million arms deals this last few months. And so before we go into kind of talking about the future and wrapping up kind of the fact that this has really been always tied into the interests of Western nations and occupying forces throughout the world and imperialist interests, Fabliha has some words to share.
Wow, thank you so much, Sabira, for talking about this. I feel like we ourselves understand that true U.S. imperialist power and the relations with Israel, but also the ties of how they funded the genocide in Pakistan. But I think hearing this deeply in depth to know the statistics and the history is so powerful. Thank you so much, Sabira. Before we really talk about the future and the now, how are we feeling? I know that there was a lot of information, a lot of history that we kind of talked about, but yeah, maybe before we get to the now and the future, how do we feel about taking a collective breath together? Because I know there was a lot of information. How does that feel? All right, cool. I know that sometimes I get overstimulated with information, so let's take a deep breath together. All right. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Let's do that 2 more times. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. One last time. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Great. I hope that felt good. I know I needed that breath. I know that we said a lot of really interesting information, but it could also be extremely harrowing as well to see how we were imperialized, to see how we were further oppressed from the military, the aid, and whatnot. But we don't want to use this as an opportunity to kind of make us reminder of all the pain, but we use this as an opportunity to rile us up, which is why we want to talk about the now and the future, given an understanding of the history. I do want to say really quickly before we talk about this is, for me, this is actually a huge new ballgame for me as an organizer. I've never really done political education. As a queer organizer, I've always been really dedicated to queer liberation. But I think this opportunity, especially what's happening in Palestine, has really given us the opportunity to go out of our comfort zones, to understand what liberation, mobilization, and resistance looks like. And as a queer person, we also have to understand that queer liberation is also always interconnected with Palestinian liberation and what that looks like and what that means. So I just wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity to really talk about this. Even though I'm not really a political organizer or a political education organizer, this has been so monumental. And what we're doing here today, you guys just coming out here, this is the revolution, y'all. Like, please, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming out here. And this is why we want to talk about the now and the future. As a queer person, as a lesbian Muslim, as a Bangladeshi, the resistance is in my blood, and resistance is in your blood. Freedom fighters is in the spirits. I just want to remind you of your blood and your ancestry. We come from a long line of revolution. That's why we're here today, because our ancestors fucking fought for their lives for us. And with that being said, I also want to talk about how mobilization looks like a lot of things. And while our ancestors went out of their way to fight to the death, basically, mobilization does look like a lot of things. I know that, even now, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of judgment, especially with our livelihoods. But I want to remind you that mobilization doesn't only look like going out in protests. It could look like going into teach-ins. It could also look like reading poetry written by Palestinians. It could look like going for brunch with your friends and calling up your elected officials to call for a permanent ceasefire. It could also look like reading books or attending book clubs. So I really want you guys to be super imaginative when it comes to your resistance and mobilization. There's no such thing as not doing enough. How can we all have a role in this? And how can we all become vehicles of liberation and movement for Palestinians? I also want to say how important archiveship is, which is why I'm so thankful that Tahia and Sabir really talked about the histories of the long support of Bangladeshis in Palestine, and also calling into the belly of the beast of the US imperialist powers and British colonialism. The reason why I say that is because archiveship is so important and is a tool of the revolution. Unfortunately, what Tahia said before, a lot of our stories are scattered, and a lot of our stories are destroyed. And I think about what's happening in Palestine with Israel destroying documentation, destroying monuments, destroying literally Palestinian identity. So how can we utilize storytelling as a means for, again, liberation? Even if you're not Bangladeshi, even if you're not Palestinian, I really want you to talk to your elders. Ask them stories. Ask them how we got here. Ask them what it looked like for them when they were obtaining liberation. Record their stories. And even if you don't have ability to ask your elders to talk about it with your communities, research on your own. And I'm also thinking about Palestinians today to really read the stories of what Palestinians are saying. Write down their names. Write down their stories, even if it means in your journal, even if it means bookmarking on the internet. We need to keep documentation. We cannot let our oppressors minimize and delete and eradicate our histories and what's happening right now. I also want to call into the fact of collective struggle. The fact is, together we are stronger, and that's what they're really scared of, y'all. They want us to be divided, but we cannot let them win. We are stronger together. Always, always together. I'm just going to move to Tahia. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Awesome, I'm gonna stand up because we've been sitting for a while now. Actually, stand up if you're in the Bengali diaspora of some sort. We're not gonna define labels or whatever. All right, there you go. We have a lot of heads in the house, amazing. I'm really glad to see this. And stand up if you're Palestinian, if you're here from the Arab region. Just keep standing. Everyone keep standing. Arab, Palestinian, etc. And stand up if you're here because every single day we are going to be fighting day in, day out until the Zionist apartheid regime falls and we have a liberated Palestine. Exactly. Absolutely. Awesome. We're going to keep it pushing. Y'all can sit back down. Thank you for that. And, you know, we went through a lot of history, and I just want to be clear that as materialists, we look at history to contextualize and understand the current political moments in order to understand political strategy and keep it pushing. However, in this moment, we're not conflating the state of Pakistan with the state of Israel. What we are making clear is the US's imperial interests in exploiting our people and dividing the third world in every single way possible. Yep. Cool. So, the Bangladeshi diaspora, we are one of the largest diasporas in the world. Across the world as migrant workers, in the Arab region, in Bangladesh itself, in the subcontinent, but also in this damn city. Bengalis run the economy of this city. From cab drivers to delivery workers to healthcare to construction, we run this city. And so our Bengali population has been steadily increasing day in, day out. So it is very key for us to be organizing ourselves, organizing our neighbors towards Palestinian liberation and all of the struggles that we are facing oppressed in this nation and in the city. And you know, right now, we know that there are a lot of contradictions. Globally, Bangladesh is opening up to global capital. We didn't recognize Israel as a state. However, in the last few years, the Bangladeshi government has purchased surveillance technology from Israeli-sponsored tech companies. There are a lot of different things that we are navigating in order to understand where we are under this capitalist imperialist system. And we know that locally, in seeking economic upward mobility, we have our neighbors joining the NYPD or other institutions that uphold systems of oppression. Again, these are things for us to grapple with in our communities day in, day out. These are not things to demonize each other on, but these are the results of living in a capitalist imperialist system. And so if we can understand it clearly, if we can understand our history clearly, we will be able to communicate with one another and navigate all of these contradictions. And we know who our real enemy is. And so I'm gonna just have you name out who our real enemies are because we got a couple and it's pretty clear. Just yell it out. Capitalism, white supremacy, Zionism, patriarchy, the US empire, Eric Adams in this city, absolutely. Richie Torres, who takes so much APAC money he cannot see past himself. But for that reason, we know who our real enemy is, we know who our neighbors are, and we know who our friends are. And every single person here in this room, consider this a friend, a future comrade, or a current comrade. Someone in which you are going to take to the streets to, someone in which you are going to be organizing alongside. And so we want to go into some mobilizations that happen here in the space. And before we go into that, we have a request from a friend in Gaza in order to get some direct support.
Yeah, thank you so much for introducing that. So I, as I mentioned, currently live in Ireland, and there's a lot of amazing Palestinians that are from Gaza currently studying alongside myself. And I have a friend, Asil, who's so sweet and literally one of the kindest people I know. So giving and so amazing. And I have a really urgent ask that has actually a 2-day timeline. So what I mean by ask, I mean get out your phones. And one way that we can stand in solidarity with Palestinians actually in Gaza, in Palestine right now, is by extending our wallets, is by actually donating and saving their families, saving them from destruction. Because at the end of the day, it takes a lot to leave your homeland. It takes more emotional, physical labor to actually leave the place that you know and love. And the Palestinians in this room can definitely attest to that through their ancestry and their history and everyone else in the world from their colonial past. But Asil, she's trying to evacuate six of her, actually, her family members. I believe it's actually 8, sorry. Her mom, her brother, her mom, her dad, her 2 younger brothers, her aunt, her uncle, and her 2 cousins. They have a 2-hour deadline to make around 20,000, which if everyone in this room donates $10 and then encourages 10 people in their life to donate $10, I'm sure we can get somewhere close to that amount. This is vital to her family evacuating Gaza. And if we can even save 1 life, we're saving a lot of the ancestry and a lot of the stories and all of the resistance is existence in Palestine. So please make sure to share this. Please make sure to actually go to the link. I made a tiny URL in the top left. So please try to help my friend, help our family all in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so going into now and into the future, I think one of the key points to make is that right now, the only way that we are going to win is if we are organized. Absolutely, I want to hear claps for that. We have to be organized. We have to join an organization if we are serious, something in which there is a political mission which we're all fighting together. Right now, every single week, the Shut It Down Coalition holds volunteer meetings here in the space. It is a very broad coalition. It is a united front of people from writers to healthcare workers to city workers for Palestine. Every Monday night at 6:30 p.m. And so this is a way for you to extend any of your skill sets. Can you make art? Can you paint a sign? Do you have language skills? Let's do outreach in our neighborhoods. Let's do speak outs on the block corner and talk to our neighbors about Zionism, about the Israeli apartheid regime. And so come out every Monday because we need, if every single one of us adds their skills and their contributions, and if every single one of us joins an organization and becomes organized, we will win. Thank you for the claps, y'all, because those claps are for us as an organized people. And so that was one shout out, Monday night, 6:30 p.m. January 6th, we'll have a Shut It Down action in which there'll be plenty of actions happening throughout the city, and there will also be a big one in Manhattan. Keep your eyes peeled. I also want to shout out Artists Against Apartheid. We've talked a lot today about the targeted assassinations of intellectuals, of artists, of cultural workers, those who propel the movement, those who maintain a liberatory energy. And Artists Against Apartheid was formed in the wake of October 7th heroic resistance efforts. And it is now over 12,000 artists and cultural workers, big names, small names, all over the place, who are dedicated to using their art and cultural work to combat Zionism and for a liberated Palestine. And so please sign on to the letter. If you make art of any sort, I'd like to meet you, let's talk, and please lend your skills to the movement. And January 13th, who's heard that there's gonna be another huge march on Washington for Gaza? Yes. Amazing. Get on the bus, y'all. We have tickets going with the Answer Coalition from Union Square, from Barclays Center, and from Queens. And we really encourage you, if you are a part of an organization that wants to send a contingent, please do. We can get in contact and talk about some of the logistics of that. But for this last action on November 4th in Washington, we had over 500,000 people out here for Palestine. That's one of the largest US actions for a liberated Palestine. And so let's make this another one of those. And this march in particular is really special because it is led by a coalition of Muslim organizations. So can you imagine the courageousness and the bravery that it takes as various Muslim organizations already surveilled and oppressed by the state to be putting on an action of this size? And so it is on us to go out and show up and take over those streets of DC. And so this week actually we'll be doing a lot of outreach throughout the city. We've already been doing outreach. We've been doing outreach at Jummah, at Maghrib time, at different masjids, speak outs on the corner. And so if you have language skills, let's talk. If you live in a neighborhood where you want to get your local leaders involved, let's talk. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we have some folks here in the room who are members of the organizations who are part of the Shut It Down Coalition. We have Bangladeshi Americans for Political Progress, and we have Drum, and a variety of other organizations. And so I would love to get a few words, first from Bangladeshi Americans for Political Progress, and then from Drum about some of the organizing happening from in the city right now around Palestine, from Bangladeshi focused and South Asian focused orgs.
Thank you so much, Tahia. Thank you, everybody. Hey, how's everyone doing today? Yeah. All right, let's get some, want to feel the energy. So if everyone can repeat after me. Free, free Palestine. Free, free, free Palestine. Free, free Palestine. Free, 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 free Palestine. From the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. From the sea to the river. Palestine will live forever. Up, up with liberation. Down, down with occupation. Up, up with liberation. Down, down with occupation. Today, thank you to all the incredible organizers for an incredible panel. Honestly, there's a great book written years ago by Paulo Freire about the pedagogy of the oppressed, right? And today I think we actually got a skeleton book of what the pedagogy of liberation looks like from all our incredible organizers. So special shout out to everybody here. So my name is Shihab Chaudhary. Really quickly, I work with Bangladeshi Americans for Political Progress. We organize the Bangladeshi American community here in New York City, across all 5 boroughs, from Parkchester. Anybody from Parkchester here today? Woo! To Jamaica. Anybody from Jamaica? All right. Jackson Heights? Yeah. Astoria? Yeah, okay. Kensington? Brooklyn? Yeah, look at that. Woo! Awesome. So we're focused on organizing Bangladeshi Americans, mobilizing working class and immigrant interests through electoral organizing, through civic education, and through really organizing for Palestine. So we have a ton of, we are one of the members of the coalition. We're doing a lot of work to organize the Bangladeshi community to come out to these events, to make sure that we're showing up at direct actions, to show up on this Saturday, right? This Saturday, Bryant Park, right? 5 p.m. We'll be there, and we're organizing the entire Bangladeshi community to show up and continue to fight for our liberation, because we know fundamentally, right, that Bangladeshis can't be free until Palestine is free. And that's the case for every oppressed community around the world, globally and locally as well. And so we're doing a lot of work to organize around that. We have a solidarity letter, a love letter that we've written from BOP to Palestinians around the world to show our solidarity and support. We'd love for everyone to sign it. We can send that link over after this event, or it's bit.ly/BOP for Palestine. Separately, we're doing a lot of work to also foster political education. We're organizing and co-hosting many upcoming rallies. We're trying to push for a ceasefire, and we're doing a lot of work on that at the both federal, state, and local levels. I just want to really reiterate that this hub on Mondays is such a beautiful gathering space, because you see folks from all over New York City, from all walks of life, come here to organize for Palestine. And I just want to reiterate that every Mondays, 6:30, you'll see artists fighting for the revolution. You'll see organizers fighting for the revolution. You'll see so many Bangladeshis here fighting for the revolution as well. Because we know that, again, that until Palestine is free, none of us will be free. And so that's what, we hope you can come here. We hope you can join our upcoming events that BOP has. And we'll be sure to share other information in the days ahead. Just thank you. And we'll see y'all soon.
Great. Thank you, Shihab. And Jaram, if you could share a few words, Akash. Awesome.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Hey, my name's Akash. I'm from Drum. Drum. Okay, cool. Drum stands for Daisy's Rising Up and Moving. We are a South Asian, Indo-Caribbean organization of working class South Asian Indo-Caribbeans, so folks from Nepal, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and then also Indo-Caribbean, so folks from Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname, etc. And then in terms of Palestine organizing work, the majority of like what we've been doing for the past 2, almost 3 months now has been really engaging our base of folks across the city, and especially in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Connecting our everyday working class struggles in New York City with the Palestinian struggle. And in the past couple of months, we've seen like amazing mobilizations, right? Over 800 high school students walking out in support of Palestine. We've seen so many workers, just showing up in a million different ways. So I'll be quick. The most important thing I would say right now, in addition to what folks have already shared, is just to join an organization, be organized, be in this work consistently. We're asking folks every day, call your Congress people, let them know that we need an immediate ceasefire. We need total divestment of military aid to Israel, and we need an end to the occupation. So that's what I would say to you, in addition to everything else that all these folks are sharing, is to be consistent and to continuously call for an end to the horrors that we are witnessing in Palestine right now. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Akash. I also want to shout out, we have some young members from the Astoria Tenants Union of CAV here. So shout out, CAV organizes Bengali immigrant communities we know that our land displacement, both in Queens, in Astoria, or in Chinatown, is deeply linked to the displacement of those around the world, of Palestinians. And so shout out to those who are organizing their buildings, organizing on their block, organizing each other as tenants. And another reminder for the GoFundMe link. We'll just keep that up on screen so that y'all can keep it and watch throughout the day. And so now we're just gonna open it up to one or two, any announcements for future mobilizations or brief comments that you have to close out today. And then we're gonna ask you to then speak to each other, turn to each other in small groups, meet somebody new, meet and make a new comrade, jot down questions and thoughts. We'll be floating around. Please grab a samosa on your way out, but don't leave right away. Let's chat. The space is open for a little while more, and this is the time for you to be building new relationships and to get plugged into the vast organizing and mobilizing that's happening around Palestine right now. And so, yeah, any quick announcements or brief comments of mobilizations to come that you want to plug? Do you want to come? Oh, yeah. Actually, I'll run you the mic. Why not? Awesome.
So, hi everyone. So on Saturday in Little Yemen in the Bronx, there's going to be a pretty much some movement going on there at 12. So come through. This is through Wall Palestine and a couple of other organizations. Yeah, for sure. So come to that at 12 in Little Yemen. And another announcement, which connects a little bit to some of what the speakers were mentioning about like the importance of documenting, is that so I got this idea to just start like gathering old photos online and upscaling them with AI, so that we're able to have them like more high res. So I'm launching this thing called the Radical Archive, which will just be like photos of resistance throughout the world. And folks will be able to like get photos there in like high res for free. So yeah, that's coming.
Cool. Any other announcements for mobilizations to come, or any commentary to close us out here today?
Hi, all. First of all, thank you all so much. This was an incredible teaching for us who are from the diaspora, who have received fragmented histories from our schools. I'm Shahana Hanif, one of the founders of BOP, and I started as an organizer at CAV, which was shouted out. And right now, I'm one of the 51 city council members, our first Bangladeshi, first Muslim woman elected. Among the first to call for a ceasefire, there are 51 council members and only 10 have called for a ceasefire. And I know there were neighborhoods shouted out like Parkchester and some of these other ones where your council members have not called for a ceasefire. And what that means is council members like Ina Vernikov, who showed up with the gun at Brooklyn College, which I'm an alum of and was a part of the robust SJP movement, she got away with it. We called for an expulsion and she went untouched. So we know that from what we've learned tonight, that so much of the decisions of how this operation around genocide and crime and violence proceeded was because of our policymakers, those who were elected to govern and lead. And I don't want that to be repeated because of what we're witnessing out here when many firsts, and we celebrate the diversity and progressivism, and yet there are 41 members who've not said anything. So I urge you to reach out to your members. And if you're plugged in with BOP and Drum, they have been working with some of us in the council to write there are written letters that you can just send out to your council member. You don't even have to know who your member is. You just got to put in your address and the letter will pop up. We need to really flood these inboxes so they don't get away with what's happening right now. Thank you.
So I'm actually speaking on behalf of SJP at Rutgers, New Brunswick. So our organization actually got suspended. Fuck universities, they're literally corporations. They just care about money. But I do want to say that after our suspension, we did have about 150 organizations stand in solidarity with SJP. So I do want to say that even though SJP is extremely important and its existence shouldn't even be questioned, it's mandatory. It should be at every single university. The movement isn't restricted to its existence. So even if they do want to suspend SJP, we're still students for justice in Palestine and other aspects. So I just want to emphasize that importance of solidarity of standing with one another, because that is really where our power comes from. And I'm telling you guys right now, every time we confront Rutgers administration, they are shaking. They don't even know what they're saying. They don't even respond to us sometimes. They be leaving us undelivered, even though they reach out first, because they don't expect us to be so powerful. But we really are. They want us to be scared. But don't be. Don't think that these people have power, because they really don't. Most of them don't even know what the fuck they're doing. They're kind of just there and they're mad confused. We know what we're doing. We're very smart. We're very passionate. Our passion exceeds white supremacy so much. So I just want to reiterate that, we have so much power. Even if they want to say we can silence you, they can't. We have rights. So just keep showing up. Even if you're scared, just show up. Just show up. And the fear will go away with the solidarity.
Yes, amazing. Any other closing comments? Yeah.
Hi, I'm just this is pretty new. It's a group called White Kites Resistance on Instagram. We're a pretty new group. We're raising money to educate people around New York. So if you see billboard trucks and stuff, sometimes those are us. Stay tuned for Saturday. There's one going out this weekend, and we're just trying to educate people around our neighborhood by raising awareness by what's happening in Palestine because of all the censorship in the media. So yeah, if you see us, tag us. Thanks.
Great. Any last plugs, mobilizations, announcements? Yeah. Anyone? Okay. Oh no, back in the back. Okay, this is the last one.
I just have a quick comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, do it.
So I just wanted to talk about, we talked a lot about the different enemies that we have, which is a lot, and really highlight how militarism and capitalism has festered into every single aspect of our lives, the nations that we're we come from, being a Bengali myself. One of the things we should also acknowledge with these freedom movements is that the people are the resistance fighters, not necessarily the governments. Because when we look at the history of the governments, they always have their own agenda, especially when we see them succumb to capitalist demands. With Bangladesh in particular, I'll talk a little bit about like the Chakma people and the Marmar and the Tripura people, who are indigenous tribes from the Chattogram Hill Tracts. And there is settlements that happen there. There is violence that happens there. And a large part of that is because of our common enemy, that is capitalism, right? Our investments in monoculture, our investments away from people that actually matter. So when we're talking about these resistance movements, it's always with us, the people, and not with the governments.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Great. We are going to close up. Maybe, Flavia, do you want to close out with anything?
Wow. Thank you guys all so much. I know that we talked about a lot and we, unlearned and learned so much together, but this is not the end. I hope you guys continue your journey with learning together and researching on your own histories and your own ways to how we can be committed to Palestine. So the fight is not over here. It never ends until Palestine is free. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, yeah. Actually, you do it.
Okay, we have a chant in Bangla, if y'all are ready for that. So I'm gonna have you get up. Okay, so this is from the river to the sea, but in Bangla, all right? All right, okay. I'm gonna say it once, and so that we hear it, you can repeat it to yourself, and then we'll practice it, okay? So, Nodi theke shumudro, Palestine hobe mukto. Let's try that one more time. Nodi teke shumudro, Palestine hobe mukto. Okay, can we try it at one time? I'll say the first part, you say the second part, which is Palestine hobe mukto, okay? All right. Nodi teke shumudro, Nodi teke shumudro, Nobi teke shumudro, from the river to the sea, from the sea to the river, from the river to the sea. Awesome, y'all. Please enjoy a samosa. Thank you for coming and get to know each other.